The sun was setting over the old ranch when Samuel first saw her lying on the wooden cart outside the general store. His weathered hands gripped the reins of his horse tighter as he approached the scene that would change everything. Margaret lay still as stone wrapped in a faded blue blanket. Her face was pale but peaceful, like someone who had simply decided to rest for a while. The store owner, Mr. Henderson, stood nearby, wringing his hands and looking uncomfortable. Samuel dismounted slowly. His boots made soft sounds on the dusty ground as he walked closer. He had lived 58 years on this earth and seen his share of hardship, but something about this moment felt different. "What happened here?" Samuel asked, his voice gentle and measured. Henderson shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "She collapsed right outside my store this morning. Been lying there ever since. Doc Miller came by and said there wasn't much time left, maybe a few hours at most." Samuel looked down at Margaret. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Her hair, once probably golden, was now streaked with silver and spread across the makeshift pillow someone had placed beneath her head. "Does she have family?" Samuel inquired, already knowing what the answer would be. "None that we know of," Henderson replied. "She's been drifting through town for the past few weeks, staying at the boarding house when she had money, sleeping rough when she didn't. Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house said she hasn't paid rent in over a week." Samuel knelt beside the cart. His knees creaked slightly, a reminder of his own advancing years. He studied Margaret's face and saw something that reminded him of his own mother, who had passed 20 years ago. The same gentle lines around the eyes, the same peaceful expression even in suffering. "How much does she owe?" Samuel asked without looking up. Henderson seemed surprised by the question. "Well, I reckon about $15 for the room and meals, but Samuel, she's not going to." "I'll pay it," Samuel said simply, standing up and reaching for his wallet. "All of it." "But why?" Henderson asked, genuinely puzzled. "You don't even know her." Samuel counted out the bills slowly, methodically. "Sometimes that doesn't matter, does it?" he said. "Sometimes we just do what feels right." He handed the money to Henderson, then turned back to Margaret. Something made him reach out and gently touch her shoulder. "Ma'am," he said softly. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Margaret's eyes fluttered open slowly. They were the color of faded blue denim, soft and kind. Despite her obvious pain, she looked up at Samuel with a mixture of confusion and gratitude. "You paid for me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Now finish it." Samuel felt his heart skip a beat. The words hit him with unexpected force. He had been prepared to help a stranger in need, but her simple request carried a weight he hadn't anticipated. "What do you mean?" he asked gently. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "I don't want to die alone on this cart like some forgotten thing," she said. "I've lived a full life, had my share of joys and sorrows, but at the end, shouldn't there be someone who cares enough to stay?" Samuel felt something shift inside his chest. He looked around at the small crowd that had gathered. They were good people, but they were also busy with their own lives, their own concerns. He understood that this was his moment, his choice. "All right," he said simply, "I'll stay with you." Henderson cleared his throat. "Samuel, you sure about this? You don't know anything about her?" Samuel helped Margaret sit up slightly, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. "What's your name?" he asked. "Margaret Rose Thompson," she replied with a small smile. "I'm 62 years old and I've been a teacher most of my life, taught children in 3 different states, never married, never had children of my own, but I've loved hundreds of them over the years." Samuel nodded. "I'm Samuel James Mitchell. I run a small cattle ranch about 10 miles north of here. My wife passed 5 years ago and my children live back east with families of their own." Margaret reached out and touched his hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "Thank you, Samuel James Mitchell. You have a kind face." Samuel helped Margaret into his wagon, making sure she was comfortable for the ride to his ranch. The sun was getting lower, casting long shadows across the prairie as they rode slowly along the familiar dirt road. Margaret began to tell him about her life. She spoke of her childhood in Missouri, of becoming a teacher at 19, of the children she had taught and loved. She told him about traveling west when her health began to fail, hoping the dry air might help her breathing. She talked about the small savings she had lived on until the money ran out. Samuel listened without judgment, sharing his own stories. When she asked the loss of his wife Martha after 35 years of marriage, the pride he felt watching his children grow and succeed, the quiet loneliness of the empty ranch house. When they reached his property, Margaret gasped softly at the sight of the simple but well-maintained buildings, the barn with its fresh red paint, the house with its wide front porch, the fields where cattle grazed peacefully in the evening light. "It's beautiful," she said. Martha was lucky to call this home. Samuel helped her inside to the guest bedroom that had once belonged to his daughter Sarah. He made sure she was comfortable, bringing her water and soup, adjusting the pillows behind her back. As the evening wore on, Margaret grew weaker, but she seemed at peace. They talked about many things, about the books she had read to her students, about the horses Samuel had raised, about the seasons and the way the light changed throughout the year. Near midnight, Margaret's breathing became more labored. Samuel sat beside her bed, holding her hand and reading from a book of poetry she had requested from his shelf. His voice was steady and warm, bringing life to the familiar verses. "Samuel," Margaret whispered as the clock chimed 12, "I need to tell you something." He leaned closer. "What is it?" Margaret reached beneath her pillow and pulled out a small leather pouch. "There's money in here," she said. "More than you might expect. I've been saving it my whole life, never spending much on myself, always thought I'd need it for something important." Samuel started to protest, but Margaret squeezed his hand. "Listen to me please, I want you to use this money to help other people, people like me who find themselves alone and frightened. Use it to make sure no one else has to face their last hours without kindness." Samuel opened the pouch and found more money than he had ever seen at once, hundreds of dollars carefully saved over decades. "Margaret, the first can't take this. You already have," she said with a gentle smile. "The moment you decided to stay with me, you became the keeper of this trust. Promise me you'll use it well." Samuel felt tears he hadn't expected. "I promise." Margaret closed her eyes and smiled. "Thank you for finishing it properly, Samuel. You gave me something precious at the end. You gave me dignity and companionship. You made me matter." She passed peacefully just before dawn, with Samuel still holding her hand. The morning light streamed through the bedroom window, casting everything in a golden glow. Samuel sat there for a long time, thinking about the strange turn his life had taken in just one day, how a simple act of kindness had brought him face to face with his own mortality and purpose. In the days that followed, Samuel arranged for Margaret to be buried in the town cemetery with a proper headstone. He used some of her money for this, but saved the rest as she had requested. Over the years that followed, Samuel became known throughout the territory as someone who helped people in need. He never spoke about the money or where it came from. He simply showed up when someone was in trouble, offering assistance without questions or judgment. He helped families whose crops had failed, paid for medicine when people couldn't afford it, made sure elderly folks had what they needed to get through hard winters. He never took credit, never asked for recognition. Samuel lived for many more years, and in all that time he never forgot Margaret Rose Thompson or the lesson she had taught him. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply show up for another human being. When Samuel finally passed at the age of 81, he was surrounded by friends and neighbors whose lives he had touched. The leather pouch was found in his dresser drawer along with a letter explaining Margaret's wish. The tradition continued long after Samuel was gone. The money was used to establish a fund that helped people in crisis throughout the territory. It became known simply as the Kindness Fund, though few people knew its origin story. Margaret had been right that day when she asked Samuel to finish it properly. He had given her dignity in her final hours, but she had given him something even more valuable. She had shown him how a single act of compassion could ripple outward, touching lives for generations to come. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as simple requests for help. Sometimes paying for someone means much more than money. Sometimes finishing it properly means beginning something entirely new.